Hello and good morning or happy whatever time it is wherever you are. It is finally time for me to give my presentation on poison dart frogs, also known as poison arrow frogs, poison frogs, etc. The reason I've chosen this as my first topic for Same Wavelength is that basically when I was a child, I was completely entranced with all sorts of different science topics, and I had sort of wonderful inspiration from things like the Magic School Bus and later on Mythbusters and all sorts of entertainment like that. But one of the things I had as a very small child was two stuffed animal poison dart frogs. And I am sure that they were from either the LA Zoo, the San Diego Zoo, or somewhere else. And my parents found them, or I had asked for them. I have truly no memory other than that one time I went to the spaghetti factory with our family friends and was like eating dinner as a probably like 3-year-old or 5-year-old. And I had these frogs and they were so entrancing because they were so vibrantly colored. Um, and in my mind, that's the kind of impact I'd like to have with this overarching same wavelength project. That if I can make something beautiful and fun that just really gets anyone super interested in a weird science topic, then I've achieved my goal. So for me, this is a lifelong commitment to the arts and sciences. And it's really exciting for me. So I've in the past made prints about poison dart frogs before. I've always sort of been interested in frogs because they're, for me, really easy to draw. So it was a very natural thing for me to come to making this work. And in the future, I'm planning so many radically different, diverse posters and stickers and like different collections of images and topics. And I was lucky enough to talk to my mom yesterday, and she had so many great ideas about doing like a local flora and fauna one for Los Angeles or um, different, like truly expansive through the different sciences. So I want to do a bunch of different space posters because, as you can tell, I'm very interested in outer space and physics. So more of those ideas will come. But this is the first one that I've worked on, and it's very exciting. So I'm going to show the work, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about um, the science of tree frogs, because that's obviously the whole point of all of this. So the first things I designed were stickers, and everything I'm about to show is just a mock-up that I've made on my home printer. They're not perfect. They're all hand cut out by me. They're all a little bit off. They're all using, a lot of them are using the wrong paper. And that's okay because when you're a designer, you get to do a lot of print mock-ups and proof of concept. And the fact that these were all my first prints for this series and are not terrible is already great. So hopefully whoever is watching gets a little behind the scenes knowledge of what it's like to be a graphic designer as well. Um, I don't know that I'd recommend anyone become a graphic designer, but it is a really interesting path that I'm on. And I do get a hell of a kick out of being an artist and an illustrator and being able to combine my drawing skills with educational or research or philosophical writing. Because that's the whole thing I've wanted to do my whole life, and I'm finally at that place. So, the first thing I designed were these. This is not a sticker. This is just a piece of paper, but this is what the stickers will look like from this collection. They're 2 by 2 inch stickers, and I made 3 different ones of 3 of the different kinds of frogs that I've been interested in. And what I did is I picked 3 of the most interesting looking frogs that had a variety of different coloration. So I wanted one that had spots, I wanted one that had splotches, I wanted one that had um, stripes. And I tried to sort of pick the 3 that really encapsulated how diverse these tree frogs look in nature. Um, the way that I made these for anyone who's actually interested in the arts element of this is that for each one of these, I would draw everything you see in black, an outline in my sketchbook by hand. And I would color in all the black elements and basically you take a photo of that, you bring that photo, that black and white photo, into your computer, and in Adobe Illustrator, which is what I use more than anything, your computer will translate those lines into a vector image. I'll talk about that in some other video. You don't need to know about that right now. And basically, it allows the computer to fill in everything else with whatever color that you want. So the green, yellow, and red patches or areas, um, I basically was able to pick exactly what color I wanted for these. And that's a lot easier than painting something by hand and then bringing it to the computer because if I had hand colored these with either watercolors or gouache or any other physical media, it basically would have showed a lot of texture and distortion of light because a lot of pigments are sort of inherently reflective to some degree. And so you wouldn't have gotten these very even swaths of color. And just for these, this is my personal style for this kind of work is that like I wanted something that felt very like flat, very 2D, very 90s. Hence the grid behind this one. Also, the grid is kind of sciencey, so those are the reasons I made these decisions. But after that stuff's in the computer, you basically are allowed to really quickly move from something like this to bookmark. Oops, bookmark. And as you can see, it's just this arranged on a black background. And then, of course, because I just printed these really quickly, the back is upside down. But this is what I want the back to look like. So using digital files also allows me to remove the colors really easily. So you get effects like this, where it's just a lot of different frog outlines on one colored background, which is an aesthetic I also very much like. So getting that kind of range on the work I make is wonderful. And that's why I do things digitally. There's a million ways to do things digitally. A lot of artists will draw on Procreate directly onto an iPad, or they'll draw directly onto a different tablet with different software. That's also stuff that I've done, especially for animation in the past, but this is how I made these. So anyone can go out and if you have an Adobe subscription, which is expensive, and you have a sketchbook, which is less expensive, you can make your own work like this. So that's these. They came out amazing. And then what I sort of realized is that for each collection, I probably want to do 3 stickers, and in the future I'll do like holographic ones or glittery ones or whatever. But I'm just taking things one at a time. And then a bookmark, and then prints and t-shirts, all sorts of things. But in terms of what I can physically make at home, this is sort of what I'm interested in. And I'm really happy with how these turned out. I think it's really cool. But sort of what I realized is that originally my plan was, oh, I'll just draw 3 of whatever for each collection. And I realized that's not enough. So, especially for this, I wanted to make a poster like this. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I know how to count. Different kinds of frogs. And they're all different. Some of them are the same species, which is super interesting, and I talk about that a little bit. So like these two are both strawberry dart frogs, but they have different color morphs, and just naturally occurring different groups of frogs will look differently, which also, of course, makes it challenging for scientists to be able to go in and say, oh, well, these two clearly look like different species, but, when you run their DNA sequencing or look at their habitats or their behaviors, you're like, oh, they're actually the same species and they can interbreed and produce children that can reproduce and all the other technical, discussion for what makes something the same species. But that's super cool. So like this one is actually called the blue jeans frog, which was my favorite fact that I learned this entire process. And then I think 2 of the other frogs on this are also the same morph, which I have on, I'll find it later, on my little cheat sheet. But yeah, so this came out really well. And I love how fun and 90s this feels. Again, the reason the aesthetic for this is this way is not necessarily because I think scientific information looks best in this sort of flattened way. I do think that contemporary science illustration, again, there's a very long history of like, well, originally science illustrations had to be like really accurate so that they like represented exactly what the thing looked like. And so you see a lot of like 3D shading or etching like hundreds of years ago. And the reason is because we didn't have photography. So that puts me and sort of my interest in this precarious position where I say, okay, well, if I'm looking at like a guidebook for different leaves around Los Angeles, I'm probably going to want to pick one that has photographs because then I can compare exactly what the thing looks like to the thing in nature. And especially if instead of leaves, I'm looking at something like mushrooms, if I were a mushroom forager, you would want a photograph. You wouldn't want a drawing because the closer you can get to actual reality, the more sure you are about the thing that you're learning about, and you don't accidentally eat the thing that's going to kill you. And so, um, realism in terms of science illustration or science representation becomes this really important thing in those realms. I think the sort of task I have, like the reason I want to make something like this instead of having just a bunch of photographs of frogs, first of all, I'm not going to the rainforest anytime soon, so I wouldn't be able to take those photographs. I don't want to use anyone else's photographs without their permission, even if they're commons on the internet, like even if they're available for everyone in the public domain. Um, I'm an artist, and I think there's something beautiful and exciting about the way that humans have a sort of inherent connection to um, art. And so I think that's a longer video I'll want to do is to talk about like why specifically illustration is so appealing and important and like good for scientific communication, and the ways in which people connect in different ways with photographs versus drawings. Um, but for the meantime, I just think this looks great. I think it looks really cool. I love frogs. I love 90s wacky frogs with bright colors. And that was the reason I made this in the first place. So this is great. I love it. Um, I'm gonna frame this and put this in my house. Um, and I'm super happy with it. But this brings me back to my original problem, which was that there's no information on this poster other than the title and the company. And that's kind of a problem because originally my whole point of this was to like educate people, and you can look at this and be like, oh, it's so cool. Those are different kinds of frogs, like ba ba ba. Um, but that's not information. And so the information comes on this flyer. And I originally wanted this flyer to be a color that was more like it's not showing up well, but like a banana yellow, less of a neon yellow. Although for poison dart frogs, neon kind of works. But literally, this is just the paper that I had at home, trying to not spend a ton of money. So I wrote up a few paragraphs of information on poison dart frogs. I did a small amount of research, and then this is like in my own language. I did not use AI to write this because I am fundamentally so against AI. And I was thinking about that while I was making all these things, is like everything that I've done here is done by hand or done by me. And it's a labor of love. It's a wonderful thing. I personally am not a proponent of AI in most artistic circumstances. I think there's obviously a lot of really important scientific work, like being able to scan for tumors more accurately than a doctor could, where AI is great. But the only sort of AI I think that's used in stuff like this is like when you scan a drawing, your computer is using, an algorithm basically to scan your drawing and then turn it into a vector image. So technically, if that's AI, that's AI, but that's old school AI. And so I'm comfortable with that. But basically, I will get into the like frog part of the video. For anyone who's interested in the poison dart frog part of this, I'm sorry this took so long. Future videos about topics that I'm making collections about will just be about the science of the thing. But for this one, I thought it was important to actually delve into like how I make the work, why I make the work, why it is the way it is. So thank you for your patience as I have discussed that. Let me find the other frog. The other two frogs that are similar are the dying poison dart frog, and one of those is the blue poison arrow frog. So those two are morphs of the same species. They're, I believe, these two. So you see that they both have the blue in them, but otherwise look really different. which is kind of interesting. So I wouldn't know that those were the same species more than any of these were the same species. So, anyways, that was a cool thing to learn. I'm just gonna read what I wrote, because otherwise, what's the point of writing something? So here's some information about the poison dart frogs. Um, what's not to love about a frog? For these striking and deadly individuals, it might be their serious toxicity. Poison dart frogs, all of whom occupy the family Dendrobatidae, are tiny, dangerous, and vibrant. Named after the usage of their toxins in Aboriginal darts, these creatures occupy Central and South America. These brightly colored frogs get their toxicity from consuming a diet of ants and mites and other stinging insects. When kept in captivity and fed a diet of bugs not high in toxins, their own toxicity wanes, only returning when their diet is once again enriched with poison. Worth noting is the coloration of these frogs itself. The aposematism, as this warning coloration is called, I should have Googled how to pronounce these things, acts in conjunction with the frog's chemical weapons. Unlike mimics, these frogs in their bright colors, ranging from electric blues to street sign reds and yellows, do signal their deadly nature and have allowed them to walk about alongside their would-be predators during the day. Over 170 species of dart frogs have been cataloged. Some species contain differently patterned frogs known as morphs, an example being the strawberry dart frog, which has different patterns, one of which is black spots on a red body and another involving blue legs. All of them are dashing. So I like combining like actual science and history facts, and a little bit of my own personal voice into my writing because I have no other way of writing. And I think what's like there's a ton that's in here that's super fascinating. Um, the reason the reason they're called poison dart frogs is because their toxins were literally used to tip the darts of arrows, which is so interesting. And I think um, only like four frogs in again, I have no idea how to pronounce this. I should get a frog expert on. I'm no frog expert. I'm just an artist telling stories. Um Phyllobates, is a group of like four, at least four, maybe four different kinds of frogs that are more toxic, and they're generally a little bit larger than the other frogs. But typically curare, which if you've watched Marvel cartoons, is like a plant-derived poison, and I think that was like far more common than using the frogs. But it's super interesting, and you get to learn this fact that has to do with how humans have interacted with different species, how we learned which ones were poisonous, how we learned that skin contact or just like even the usage of the toxin on a metal or a piece of flint could harm someone else and poison them. Super interesting. So again, it sort of shows how like one little story or piece of science can connect to a million different elements of life. And like if you want to get into neuroscience or, biology, you get to learn how, different poisonous or venomous species, frogs, lizards, snakes, obviously, how their different toxins infest the body. And like these different frogs have different toxins they developed differently in some of the different frogs. And so uh, I'm not going to do a little bit of discussion of how toxins work because that stuff is scary and I am not a doctor. But if I recently read a book that discussed like how snake venom works, and it's fascinating to see how different toxins affect the blood, either, making blood clot or making it really not clot, making it actually really runny, and how different toxins have different adverse effects on the body, how they affect the brain, how they cause strokes or shutdown in like different organs. And yes, that is the defining feature of these frogs is their poisons and their toxicity. But I don't want to go into too much on that. And I think because I don't want to scare anyone, even though this is the October 1st Halloween episode, one of many Halloween episodes of this channel. So I think if you're interested in that stuff, you can do that research on your own. And I will leave you with what I've said about the toxicity. What I think is super fascinating is how we were able to do experiments to prove that the toxicity of the frogs was based on their diet. I think most people know the fact about like flamingos are pink because they eat a lot of shrimp. I think it really brings the you are what you eat topic into full effect, I think it's really interesting because, I don't ever think about how the things I eat um, have that much of an effect on my outward appearance or like physical abilities. Because I mean, I think there's something like if you eat enough carrots when you're a baby, you do turn orange, but typically humans, we don't have we're not poison and we don't turn pink. And it's really cool to see how these different biological processes operate in different species. Um, and that's absolutely fascinating to me. It's also very cool that like as soon as the frogs eat more toxic bugs, they return to being toxic themselves. There's a lot of interesting research that's already been done and is yet to be done on how um, these animals don't poison themselves with their own toxicity, or how, these frogs consuming these uh, toxic animals don't get hurt by the ants and the mites and the poison that's within them, and then their bodies are just naturally able to absorb those toxins and then recycle them to make their skin toxic. Um, that's absolutely fascinating. I In another lifetime, I think it would have been interesting for me to have been a biologist and do research on this. I think the reason I'm doing what I do now is that I'm really fascinated in 100 million different scientific questions and the ability to discuss them. And I don't think I could spend several years of my life on any individual topic doing research. And so being able to be a science communicator and still be part of that educational pipeline without having to do the research on an individual topic is good for me because my attention span is not good enough to do that kind of science research. I know I tried to be a physicist. It did not work. But yeah, I think the stuff is super interesting. I think the coloration of the frogs is really fascinating. The fact that the coloration implies that they're poisonous is great. I mentioned briefly mimicry. So in snakes, you have some pretty clear examples that most people know about where like there are certain snakes that are venomous and then other snakes that are not venomous but have grown the patterning or like mimicked the patterning of the venomous snakes so that they're left alone. These frogs have these bright colors because they are venomous and it's a signal to other creatures, don't eat me. And I think what's fascinating is that in some of the research I read, it talked about how that coloration isn't from the toxin. The toxin isn't yellow or blue or red. It's that the two things evolved um, one at a time, and we're not quite sure how they evolved, which is fascinating. So it's entirely the case that they could have been toxic beforehand and then developed the coloring to let other animals know that they were toxic. Because the reason that they are colored this way is that the evolutionary pressure was on them for them to be able to actually like walk about during daytime and not get consumed by predators. So if you want to walk alongside all these predators, to be able to go collect your food, you need to like look a certain way so that they don't attack you because they're not going to know inherently that you're poisonous, I guess is the sort of very human telling of a very long evolutionary story. But that's how the theory goes. And so I think that's absolutely fascinating. There is at least one kind of snake that can eat at least some of these frogs, which is interesting too, looking at how different animals sort of compete in this evolutionary race for resources. Again, the animals aren't competing. It's just which animals die, which animals live on to pass on their genes, how animals adapt. That you can learn all about current theories of evolution, not in this video. Um, the theme of this channel is there's a lot of different things you could talk about in many directions from any given topic, and I need to stay on track. One thing I read, which was super interesting, is that one of, I think it was the golden dart frog, which is in that group of the four frogs that were used for the poison dart, um, can kill 10 to 20 men and or 20,000 mice, which I think is horrifying. Um, and because most of these frogs are very small. They're like an inch or something. They weigh like I don't want to say the wrong thing. They weigh either a gram or an ounce. which is a huge difference. Um, I need to look that up and maybe I'll comment that later. But on average, these are very light, small creatures. They're like you see photographs of them and they're on someone's hand and they're very small. And to think that something so tiny could be so damaging, I mean, it's like a spider bite or something. Like it's fascinating how very small amounts of chemicals radically affect, an entire body, like a whole human. Um, and it really sort of puts into perspective uh our relationships with nature and our size, where we exist. There are so many creatures that are so much tinier than us, so many creatures that are so much bigger than us. It really sort of gives you pause to think like, wow, this really tiny creature could kill, um, 20 of me. Um, the golden frogs are a little bit bigger on average than the rest of the tiny dart frogs, but it's interesting. So that's some of what I've learned. If you're more interested in these things, like everything, I'm not an expert in any of these topics. I'm someone who's just a nerd and interested in reading things and then spitting them back out, kind of doing the process for you of what I think is personally interesting. Um, but I highly recommend after watching a video of mine going out and actually doing your own research, because I get things wrong. I am just one person who's interested in maybe a few different facts that most people wouldn't be interested in, or maybe there's a ton of facts about certain things about different topics that you would be much more interested in than the few that I've given. Maybe you're really fascinated in this sort of Aboriginal culture around using these frogs as darts, and maybe you want to learn more about the people who lived in these spaces with these frogs and continue to live there. Um, I do want to note that there are over 170 species of these frogs. Different ones experience different levels of um, endangered status. Some are totally fine, others are critically endangered. Um, Obviously, it's hard for humans to completely know and catalog how many of a species are left, especially in a dense jungle. But I think it's really important that we think about those things. I recently watched a video about another kind of frog that was not a poison frog, where we thought, um, actually, it was a toad, I think. It was like the last toad of its species, and then researchers found like five more of them and are artificially breeding them to hopefully get their population back to normal. And there's a ton of ethics associated with that. There's a ton of different competing theories on human influence on the human impact on a certain space, and whether because we are changing different spaces through logging and farming and climate change, whether um, that means we should go in and try to save the species or interfere with them. And different people obviously have different perspectives on those topics. But I do think it's a little sad that some of these frogs are endangered. These are some of my favorite creatures, just like for my entire life. And I think the sort of response, if not going in and trying to save them ourselves as, human saviors and scientists and whatnot, is a sort of reckoning with the kind of practices that we all perform on a daily basis without thinking about them. So I think if you don't have any sort of concept of logging and farming and the cutting down of the Amazon and the different fires and, cattle ranching in those spaces that's artificially introduced there because of the pressure of those different industries, those are really important things to educate yourself on. And in general, there's different topics like palm oil, the harvesting of palm oil, which is this ingredient that goes into a ton of um, different food products that Americans and people elsewhere consume, and why that industry is fraught. And if it's artificial to go in and breed these species back to normal, then it's not artificial to change your own personal buying habits, or sort of put pressure on your elected officials to not necessarily like ban palm oil. I don't know enough about the industry to have a sort of like reckoning with that. But to make these changes such that um, even though there's so many humans and we have such a complex like network of systems and society and globalism, maybe there are ways to leave less of an impact on these species that is so negative. So I think that's kind of my pitch is that when learning about the most seemingly simple individual topic, you think about all of these things. You think about ethics and society and um, neuroscience and physics. You think about all of the ways in which things are connected. At least that's how I operate. Anytime I'm learning about a topic, my brain is always going off in all these different directions. Um, and that's a sort of inherent part of my life, and I'd like to share that with people because not because I think it's a great way to live. I'm always a little stressed out, but I do think it makes something as simple as this much more interesting. And if you can look at an image like this and it reminds you of all of these deeply interwoven and connected issues, which is sort of the point of a podcast in the first place, um, then that's good. I don't really need to justify it more than that, other than the feeling that I think it's important to use whatever platform and skills I have in the pursuit of cool art and science education. And I will leave with that. So this is what I'm making. I'll keep the channel updated with whether I decide to do a print on demand thing, whether I decide to have posters in shops around Los Angeles. I personally am not going to do shipping. Other than maybe if I have a Patreon, I probably would feel comfortable shipping out like small letters because the shipping on that is super quick and easy with stamps. But I have sort of come to the point where I realize that my personal skills lie in storytelling. Whether or not I'm good at that, I don't know. You guys get to determine that. I kind of uh, feel like I should have been a little bit more research for giving this talk. But I have storytelling skills and I have the design skills, and I think that's what I want to spend my time doing for this project. So practical things I'll keep you posted on. And yeah, I'm super excited about this. I love poison dart frogs. I'd love to have these products released so that people can get their hands on them and have them in their homes, on their water bottles, on their laptops, and spread a little bit of science intrigue around the world, hopefully, a little bit, a little bit. Um, but yeah, thank you for staying along. And I'm not sure what the next topic is going to be yet. I still don't even feel comfortable and finished that this is a finalized group of products. I think these are great. I'm probably not going to draw more frogs, but although 11 out of 170 is kind of paltry, um, not even 10%. So I'm happy with these, but I feel like I do want to do some more educational design and product design, shirts and hats and things. So, as I am figuring out this process, eventually, hopefully, I land on something more streamlined and, um, you know, finalized so I look a little less silly. But I do think it's maybe exciting to see the behind scenes of someone inventing their whole company brand, etc., from scratch, from the bottom up. And I haven't even gone into details. Maybe I'll do a video on this of all the other video series and design projects and things that got me to this moment because this is, you know, this looks very polished and I made this stuff over the course of like a week or two, but this is like 5 years of thinking and design school and practice, and 20 something years of drawing, to culminate in this. And this isn't even finished. This, I feel, will expand and grow so much. My art style and my work will change and get polished over the course of this project. So, if you're feeling daunted by the work that I'm doing, it is a very long, long time coming. So, thank you. I'll keep you posted. And this was our first brand topic launch collection drop lecture. And I'm super happy about it. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.